This morning we're going to experience some quotes from the sermons, the writings, the lectures, the letters of Martin Luther King Jr. They're just short little quotes. By definition, they're out of a total context. So let's try to always remember as we hear these quotes and then we discuss for a short time what we think those mean for us in today's world. Let's remember that the context in which Martin Luther King lived his life on purpose was always within what he pictured as, he called it, the brotherhood of humankind. That's what he was a part of every minute he breathed. That's where he was sort of, as we say, coming from all the time. That's why he was so much against so many different wars. Got himself in a lot of political trouble for that. Just because he did not see that those wars were doing anything purposeful for any part of humankind. That's why he was so much against the caste system that still exists in the United States, the caste system of economics and, of course, of race. Not because he was black, not because he was a preacher, but because he understood himself and all the rest of us at every point in time to be part of the brotherhood of humankind. So if he was still alive and we had the honor of being with him, and he looked at any of us sitting out there as we longed to hear his words, he would be looking at what he understood to be his sister or his brother. And he always deserved and certainly wanted that same thought from those to whom he was ministering. He said so often, I don't want to be the brother-in-law of white people. I want to be their brother. You figure out what he meant by that. Most of these quotes are not the most famous quotes. All of these quotes were terribly important to a lot of people at the time they were said. And these were chosen only because they can be divided up maybe into three different kinds. What is the message that Martin Luther King is trying to give to us today? We're just going to use a few quotes and deliberate over that. And then, is it even possible to bring forth this vision he had? And lastly, no matter what, where do we go from here? Let's see if his quotes help us struggle with those questions. The first one is this. We're going to have them up here too, but listen to the words as well. Let us therefore think of our movement not as one that seeks to integrate into all the existing values of American society. Let us be those creative dissenters who will call our beloved country to a higher destiny, to a new plateau of compassion, to a more noble expression of humanness. What does that say to you? What's that say to you? Okay. Anybody else? What's he saying there? No matter what the status quo is, it's not good enough. What's he? Yeah, whoever them is. Yeah, okay. Anything else? In other words, okay, so in other words, you're saying that he's saying that don't think you have to be stuck with old-fashioned values for everything going forward. Okay. Sure. How many of you ever used or heard the word nice? Really? What's it mean? What's nice mean? It used to mean accurate, you're right, yeah. That's nice, yeah. But what's it mean in a societal sense? Do persons who rock boats get called nice? No, they don't, do they? Do persons who challenge the status quo get called nice? Do persons who say, you're a racist, get called nice? No. So that was part of what he was saying. Don't think you just got to be nice, or that everybody has to say, well, he's doing things the way I would have expected him to or her to. Don't worry about that. Do it because it's right, he was saying. Famous back in the 1950s and 60s, but still today, his readings are read a lot in ethics circles. A man named H. Richard Niebuhr, he was Reinhold Niebuhr's brother, wrote a book about the relationship of Christ and the Christian faith to society. He didn't care what society, any society. He actually came up with 9 different models. Christ, vis-a-vis society. But the most controversial one, and the one he said was the most important, was Christ against society. He didn't mean that in the kind of a contest or a war, but Christ always calling society to task, saying, is this what you really think is right? Is this what you really think is good? Because I have a higher standard. I think that's also what King was saying here. He was saying, of course, go ahead. Okay, if you think something is wrong, you shouldn't compromise. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It's not sort of wrong, it's wrong. Okay. And people will condemn you for stirring things up. How many of you were really into it when King was alive and during the peace marches and during the Civil Rights Acts and everything? Anybody that was really, personally, you really cared about it and listened to it and everything? Because the most common thing that people that didn't like what he was doing would say was, he's riling things up. He's stirring things up. Shame on him. Nonsense is what he would have said. So I think that's what he's saying there, don't all of you? Let's remember that. We might get a little bit upset after about 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months of feeding people a meal once a week, because we'll get to know a lot of those people that we don't know right now. And lo and behold, we might figure out that there's sort of a common reason that keeps rearing its ugly head about why they're hungry in a country that has surpluses of food. And we might say we got to upset the apple cart, so to speak. And you know what they'll say about that church, that First Congregational Church. By the way, I'm proud of the fact they're already saying that. Did you know that? Yeah. Oh, that's that activist church down there on the road. That's honestly they are. I was surprised. I don't think we've done that much. What's that say about the other churches? Okay, let's move on to another. Remember, what's the message? The person who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as the one who helps perpetrate it. The person who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. Wow. That's a strong statement. We won't go on to the next one yet. That's a strong statement. Person who passively accepts evil is a part of it. There's another go ahead.
What I remember, what that popped into my mind was the saying, if you're not part of the solution, you're
part of the problem. Great, thank you for that. Did you hear that? If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Edmund Burke, that great curmudgeon from England, He once said, the best way for evil to succeed is that good, he said, good men do nothing. You ever hear that quote? So this quote from Martin Luther King is right along the same pathways as many of those quotes. I think even Socrates said something along those lines, and that was centuries ago. However, how many of you remember, because last year on Martin Luther King Sunday, we had a partial reading of the letter from Birmingham jail. But he said this at that point in his letter to white clergy. Do you remember what they kept saying to him? They kept saying, don't stir things up so much. You're saying things too harshly. People just aren't ready to hear that, you know. And that was their excuse for not doing anything, for not even joining in the marches. That was their excuse because, our people just aren't ready for this. And of course, what he would like to have said to them, my people are, why aren't yours? So, go ahead. Sounds like an excuse to me, he would say. Yeah. But see, a prophet isn't going to let you off the hook, because a prophet's going to say, okay, continue to do nothing, and you're part of the problem. Continue to do nothing, and you're helping evil out. You see it, and you don't even protest. Then you're part of it. Woo. You think you'd be willing, we would be willing to carry along that kind of a standard? I hope we are. I hope we are, because we're going to see plenty of it in the next few years. Plenty of that evil stuff, okay? Now the next one says, this was used, I believe, by President Obama in his last State of the Union message. Part of this quote, I think he did. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. Other than some eloquent words, do you hear anything there? Despite what happens, you need to stick with it. Keep moving forward. Who else? Love wins. Okay, the bumper sticker. What else? What's it saying? What's it saying about evil and right, truth and love? When I first accepted the call, Nancy, to the church I served in Connecticut, literally the first week I was there, the conference minister asked me to come over to a meeting, and I ended up a few weeks later getting arrested as part of a group of almost all clergy persons that were demonstrating at the entrance to this place called Church Homes. What it really was an excellent place. It had apartments that you could, buy, and then if you needed assisted living, that, and then after that they had a very good skilled nursing home, and they even had a physical therapy unit and things like that. Great place. And it was actually started, 50 or 70 years before I got to Connecticut by a bunch of Congregational churches. That's why it was still called Church Homes, okay? The people that worked there were taking care of many of my generation's parents. They were visiting them every day. They were talking to them. They'd laugh with them. They'd read cards to them. They'd give them a bath. They'd wipe their rear ends if that's what they needed. They would give them their medicine so they didn't take the wrong. In other words, they cared for them in ways that their own children were either unable or unwilling to do. And after they did that for 8 hours, they had to go out and work another 8-hour job because they weren't getting paid enough money to even live on, doing such wonderful things for those needy people. And here is this place calling itself Church Homes. So we got together and we protested and we got ourselves arrested because we were blocking one of the 3 entrances. I mean, I don't want to take a lot of credit for doing something real brave because there were 2 other entrances that they could use. And the ambulance entrance wasn't the one we blocked. So, but we did, and it was an interesting thing because the judge that we had to go up before, you know, it was all orchestrated. So the police came and they arrested us, and because I had bad shoulders, they let me have my hands in front of me. Went on to this school bus that they used for things like this, where you got really quickly told your charge and all this kind of stuff, and when to appear at court. So the day we appeared in court, now don't forget, I had already appeared in that court many times in the past because I had also practiced law in the past. But anyway, and so, you know, I'm comfortable going to the court, and the judge who has to hear murders and rapes and all these kind of things. Here's this bunch of clergy persons who were sitting down, it was in the rain, by the way, sitting down, occupying a driveway. He didn't want to hear us, and so he said, here's what I always do with these things. You're going to do a certain amount of hours of community service, and then we'll just expunge this from your record. All but one person agreed to that. It was I. Your Honor, you know, I can't do that. What? Anyway, make a long story short, I wanted the world to hear why we had been there, not just that we sat down in the rain in a driveway. And I knew that if this ever came to a full hearing, that they'd hear it. And I also knew it was a misdemeanor. That didn't mean a thing to me. You know, it'd be a $50 fine or something like that. It didn't work because the judge outmaneuvered me. And he said, I found out that you do all this community service by running this, you know, agency and all this other kind of stuff, so I'm just going to say you already did your community service, goodbye. But that's a long-winded explanation, and it's not because I'm a hero. But it does say that sometimes you gotta speak up for what is right. And it's not going to be the easy way out all the time to do that. But either it's right or it's not. You know, it's not just kind of wrong. It's wrong or it's not. And so if we are going to be doing that which we think Christ is calling us to do, we've got to believe it's right and it's good. And as soon as somebody can come and question us about either what we're doing or how we're doing it, we don't need to have an instant answer for them. It would be smart to have a good answer at some point for them, if it's a good question. But we don't owe it to them. We don't owe it to them. We owe it to hunger that someday we've worked ourselves out of a job. Wow. Wouldn't that be something? It'll never happen. But isn't that true? Isn't that what he's saying here? Look it. If you've dedicated yourself to that which is right and that which is loving and that which is true, that's all. That's everything. You don't need to worry about anything else, even if it looks like evil is winning. What do you think it felt like when Bull Connor used those hoses in the march? What do you think it felt like? Did it feel like they were winning when those high-pressure hoses were knocking them out, knocking them down and scooting across the highway? Huh? Didn't feel like they were winning, did it? They got right back up and marched the next day because of this. So let's remember that. Well, that's the message. It's a message of commitment, not giving up, going on, doing what you believe in, and knowing that's what you're doing. This next section of quotes, I've just arbitrarily labeled, yeah, but is it even possible? Don't we ask that? Before we do that, though, I just now saw something. Remember I told you that that first hymn that we sang was often thought of as the African American national anthem? Well, years ago, I think it was at the 100th anniversary, 100th anniversary of our country in 1876 or something like that, people wanted to have a national hymn, not anthem, but hymn, H-Y-M-N, written. And so it was written, and that's what we're going to sing next, because this is sort of put to music what everybody's highest aspirations are, but it lacks perhaps the call to commitment. But let's sing it together. It's number 592. Did you know it is technically called the national hymn? And I hope you saw that in that one verse was love and truth and what was the other thing? Remember that? All those things, but it's not always that glorious. Okay, the second group of quotes. Is it even possible to do this kind of thing? Have we not come to such an impasse in the modern world that we must love our enemies, or else? The chain reaction of evil, hate begetting hate, wars producing more wars, must be broken, or else we shall be plunged into the dark abyss of annihilation. Wow. That's powerful, eloquent. And it wasn't written yesterday. He wrote that about 40 years ago now. Does that say anything to you? What was he trying to get across to us? I think, Shar, you were hitting on it a little bit earlier about, you feel like there's just not much you can do as a person and things like that. What's he saying there? Is he saying, love your enemies? Is that what he's saying? He's lifting that standard that Jesus used of love, isn't he? I mean, you can find that in the scriptures a number of different places in the New Testament. Yeah. There's no way out. He's saying, isn't he saying at least that if we just keep going on as nations the way we've been going, and don't forget, he would have said, our nation is the people. If we just keep going on the way we have been, it's annihilation. Go ahead. Wow. Boy, did you hear that? That was great. It's never a you, it's always a we, but it starts with me first. Wow. Was that on your own? I don't mean I'm surprised at you, but I've never heard that before like that. Educator, yeah. That was great. What do y'all think? Do you get that from this or from all of it, like she said? That's an interesting thought. But it does point out the fact that it's always going to feel like things are so big, there's not much we can do. Like, what are we going to do about Iran? Anybody here, sitting here right today? Anybody have an idea what you can go over and do to get rid of the problems with Iran as a nuclear power? Sit down. You're going to go do that? Well, yeah, but lots of people that are supposedly really good at talking have been doing it. We can just, if we fixate on the bigness or the seemingly unendingness of it, things look pretty gloomy, don't they? He said this about he was using the thoughts of the Vietnam War, which actually when he wrote this, it was basically over by then. But he was seeing the world as it was and had been, and the Cold War was still very real at the time he wrote this. And you might want to argue, yeah, but things are a lot different now. Good luck proving that. Okay, so you can see how it might be possible to feel like we've come to such an impasse. Now, who's the we he's talking about in that? Have we not come to such an impasse in the modern world that we must love our enemies, or else? Yeah, humankind. He's not just talking about people in the movement anymore, is he? So he's kind of like the prophet Jonah. If you remember the story of Jonah, he's a prophet of Israel, but he was sent to prophesy to Nineveh. Nineveh wasn't even Jewish. It was the greatest seaport of all time back then. He was supposed to tell them how evil they were. And Jonah said, "You got to be kidding, God." Well, now here's a prophet talking to all of humankind. Okay, let's move on. The first question which the priest and the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? What's that saying? Look beyond ourselves, okay. But can you try to picture this? Put yourself that you are a tourist in New York City. I don't care how many times you've been there. Let's say you're there the first time ever, and you're walking along, and here's a guy dressed in a business suit, obviously passed out on the sidewalk. What are you going to do? Because everybody else is walking by. What are you going to do? Why? Because the right thing to do, but what's the question? Because it's New York City, and you've heard all these things about be careful in New York City, you don't know who you're dealing with. It's interesting. What is the number one concern, supposedly, from the political polls right now on, I hate to call it the presidential race because, it's all this time before it's going to happen, but still, what's the number one concern people are expressing? Security. Security. That's the same as that first question. What's going to happen to me? Me, 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 me. The wrong kind of me, me, me. What's going to happen to me? That is absolutely human nature. You do not have to be a bad person to wonder that first and foremost all the time. That is human nature. What's this going to do to me? What's this going to cost me? Go ahead, Nancy.
Your statement was the man passed out on the sidewalk was wearing a business suit.
Yeah.
People would stop and help someone wearing a business suit, but if he was laying in the gutter and looked like a homeless man,
Yeah.
nobody would look at
Yeah.
him.
Wouldn't even call for help usually. Good point. I dressed him up on that one. See, the thing is, Jesus was smart enough when he gave that parable of what we call the Good Samaritan. He was smart enough to not say anything to identify the person in the ditch except that he was in need. He wasn't dressed well or not well, nothing else. Just that he was in need. So I dressed him up a little bit, you're right. Well, what's he saying to us in this? One thing he's saying is that if we're asking the question Jesus wants us to ask, if I don't help, what will happen to him? We are not normal. We are not like everybody else. We aren't doing the first thing that would naturally occur to us. We aren't asking that first question. And we're going to stick out like a sore thumb. People are going to say we're stupid, we're foolish, we're taking too many chances with ourselves. All those kinds of things are going to happen. Because you do something good, you're going to get criticized. That doesn't sound like fun, does it? It's true, but it doesn't sound like fun. Well, Let's think about that. Go ahead.
You know, today, they have, people are doing something. They have places for homeless people, and they have soup kitchens. So people are doing things.
Sure.
Maybe they can't help that particular person right there,
But see,
I know it's,
his example is this. That person right then needs help. So if you say, I can't help that person right now, then Martin Luther King, he always did. He'd say, well, when do you think you can help him? He needs the help now. He doesn't need it tomorrow. Didn't need it yesterday. Well, he might have needed it yesterday, but okay. Let's go on to the next one, another provocative one. This hits home for all, at least, modern Christians. Any religion that professes to be concerned about the souls of men and is not concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them is a spiritually moribund religion awaiting burial. That's one of my favorite quotes. Do you agree? He says any religion. He doesn't just say Christianity. The one that we, of course, have got to be concerned about is Christianity, because that's what we think of ourselves as trying to do. Anyone that's concerned about the souls, but not about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions. Wow. Wow. These are all things that are speaking to our fears. These are all things that are speaking to the natural state of being human, and we're, of course, being asked to go above that, always in trying to live the life of Christ. Our bar is set higher than just the ordinary. Martin Luther King knows that. All pastors know that. And yet, we have the unenviable task of asking people to do things that are not easy or normal, that will not be envied by others, but criticized by others. This is what happens all the time. Maybe not every second, maybe not every day, but over a period of a year, if there's a Christian community any place that's really stuck on being Christian in their community, they're going to get a lot of this. And it hurts. It hurts for lots of different reasons. It hurts because it's yet another burden added on to the burdens you've already accepted. It hurts because some of these people you thought were your friends, your people that would support you and everything in the community and everything like that. It just plain hurts because you always need more help than you have. The problem always gets bigger than you thought it was going to be, and then you're criticized for trying to help it. See, those are downers, aren't they? What Martin Luther King had learned from being a black Christian in the United States, and he remained that his whole life, what he had learned was, yeah, it's going to be hard. There's going to be terrible times, but God is in there somewhere. God will be there on the other side. Or don't forget that. Get through it and then keep going on. That's what he would have said, because this is all very real. And no wonder most of the world seems to be like that, because that's only human. There's a black spiritual that was written so that those black Christians could remind themselves of this reality and that they must keep going on. Let's sing it together now. It's number 553. I try to remind myself whenever I'm singing an African American spiritual to always try to remember as I'm singing it who wrote it and what it meant to them. So maybe I can get to the point where it could mean that to me too. So I encourage you to do that in the future. Now, this last section is the question that Martin Luther King not only always called upon his followers to face, but every day of his life he was confronted with. Where do we go from here? If you read any of the biographies written of him by the persons who were with him the entire time, it's amazing the struggle he went through with black people. It's amazing the taunts and the racism that he had to deal with from white people. It's amazing how he had to ask himself the question too. Oh, after all these days that have gone, where do we go from here? And guess what? The answer wasn't always apparent. Sometimes the only answer that could be given was, we have to keep going on. So first short little quote. He wants us to believe this: the moral arc of the universe bends at the elbow of justice. What's he saying by that short little kind of pithy saying? The moral arc of the universe bends at the elbow of justice. What? Justice is necessary? It's quite a strong statement, because here's what he's really saying. Justice is built into the creation. It's necessary. If there's injustice, it's wrong. The moral arc, moral always has to do with right and wrong and good and evil. As soon as you hear that word, it means values. Right and wrong, good and evil. So the moral arc, in other words, the whole compass of that which is moral and good, it always gets bent by justice. That's what makes it an arc. He wants to remind us of that that's always going to be true. So, hunger is a need, isn't it? Just plain a need. And that's the red flag for Christians. Uh-oh, you got to dive in there. There's a need. Let's meet the need. Okay? And then you keep doing it, and you find out that the reason there's such a need is because of an injustice. Shouldn't that be a red flag too? Isn't he saying that built into the very fabric of the universe, of creation, is justice? And if we see an injustice, what does that imply? What's that imply? Not only get involved, but remember those things before about those who see an evil and just act passively toward it, become a part of it? He's saying that again about, okay, where do we go from here? Well, you won't have to go very far, he's saying. You're going to find an issue of justice. The next quote, I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He said that more than once. He did not just say that in the I Have a Dream speech. In fact, he said it for certain on two other occasions. Do any of you know what those two occasions were? The first one was when 4 little black girls got blown apart in the basement of a church by a bunch of racists. Do you remember that? The church bombing where 4 little black girls got killed. It wasn't long after that he said that. Wow. I look to a day where people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. What he actually said that day was when 4 little girls will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. You've all heard this before, haven't you? The second time he said it, he was talking about his own 2 little girls. And he said, when my own little girls will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. You know, we can all agree with that desire, can't we? Isn't the question whether or not we white folks will ever be able to feel it? We think racism is a problem for black people. Well, let me tell you, it sure is. But whose problem is it really? Martin Luther King had a fast answer for that one. Racism is white people's problem. And only they are ever going to solve it. Remember that. This last one is great, though. This last one is great. Boy, did he mean this one. And he was telling this to some older black congregations who were absolutely dead set against the marches in Selma and down south because they were going to stir up too much trouble and make it harder for them. This is what he told, and this was true when he said it. I have stood in a meeting with hundreds of youngsters and joined in while they sang, I ain't going to let nobody turn me around. It is not just a song. It is a resolve. These songs bind us together, give us courage together, help us march together. Remember the songs of the 60s. Many of you are too young to remember that. I hope you hear them sometimes. I'm talking about the civil rights songs. I'm talking about the folk songs. All those things, about the marches. They were very real. They changed the course of an entire nation. By the way, the richest and most powerful nation on the face of the earth. The whole course of that society was changed back then by those things. And it meant so much to have songs. The same thing happened in South Africa. Do you remember? How many people remember the years and years of apartheid in South Africa and how the black people, along with white people, started marching? We are marching in the light of God was the name of their song. Siyahamba ekekenwa kwinko. That's how you say it in Swahili. That was their song. It was important. Harry Chapin was a poet, a balladeer, and he, unlike Bob Dylan, was a really good singer too. And he wrote a song, Remember When the Music. How many of you knew Harry Chapin songs at all? Or remember when the music came from wooden boxes strung with silver wire. And as we sang the words, they set our hearts on fire. We believed in things, and so we'd sing. That's the way it was for many of us who got to be alive back then. We believed in things, and so we'd sing. That's why we still sing songs as part of worship in churches. It's because we believe in things, and sometimes singing them brings us together and states it in a way that's better than just saying it. How many of you remember what the song of the civil rights movement was in the 60s? We Shall Overcome. How many of you know that song? We Shall Overcome. How many of you have ever sung it? Not many, huh? Why not, do you think? Why not? What? It's not, yeah, it is. Yeah. It's been in every congregational hymnal ever since it was written. We Shall Overcome. How many of you think it's a black song? It is. That's who sang it first. That's who sang it first. But they weren't always just marching alone. There were more and more and more whites and Jews and other colors of people who started marching together for justice, for a different world, for a higher standard, for love, and those kinds of things.